Shalom Rocha, good morning. With Siyata D'Shmaya, let's turn to the pages of this week's Parsha, Parshas Chai Yisora. With Siyata D'Shmaya, let's head right to the beginning. A state and pasuk the Torah relates as follows: Vayu Chai Yisora Mea Shana Ve'asrim Shana Ve'sheva Shanim Shnei Chai Yisora. Rashi picking up after you just told me the years Vayu Chai Yisora. Why the need? Seems to be somewhat superfluous to then reiterate at the pasuk's close Shnei Chai Yisora. To that Rashi responds as follows, writes Rashi in Dibra Maskell, Shnei Chai Yisora, Kulon Shovin L'Taiva. They were all equal for greatness, for goodness. Interesting, in the Mikros Gedolos, various editions, the articles of Chulei, no one seems to bring a makor for Rashi. Let's keep in mind the Rabbeinu Tam, writing in the Seder Hadoros of Halpin writes, Erech Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Tam said, a parish like my Zaidi Rashi on all of Shas, on Gan Shas, the entirety of Shas, I could go ahead and pen something just like that, but my Zaydi's Perush on Torah, in fact on all of Tanakh, was written Mila b'Mila Baruch HaKodesh, word for word, based on that divine spirit, based on Ruach HaKodesh, Mela Zot Rashi, Shnei Chai Yisora. What's it here for? Kulan Shavon L'Taiva. And the Sefer Limudei Hashem, Rabbi Yonatan Steif, and that they printed recently in Bereshis. You have the Biurim of Rabbi Yonatan Steif on the bottom. Rabbi Yonatan Steif says, "What Shnei Chai Yisora leidavi mala sori menu shekol shnoseh kulan hayishov l'taiva." To highlight yet further the godless, the greatness of Sari Menu, all of the years were cool and Shov l'taiva. And in the Biurim they cite very Zohar Kodesh lo matzina obishum isha klosh nezev hayuchaye, and writes the Zohar kegavna dola havi b'chon sheyalma, like a case like this that never was by any other woman. Lo havik yisor b'chon sheyalma. We know Eishes Chayim Yimtza in the Medrash Tova Mishlei, the very end Perklam and Aleph, a reference to Sari Menu Eishes Chayim Yimtza, the one we've spoken about many times. Megillah Yadalit and Aleph, she heads the list of the Zayin Nevi'is, the 7 prophetesses, and she simultaneously heads the list on Tezvav and Aleph and Mesechus Megillah. Arba Yafios Hayibayolim, and the foremost beautiful people that ever lived. The Gadlus Asara Kulon Shovin L'Tova. So let's share a couple of gems this morning. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Drash Moshe, he asked the Kasha, Kulon Shovin L'Tova, they were all equal for good. What are you talking about? That's not true. They weren't all equal for good. She had to wait 90 years before having a child. She had to deal with Hagar. She had to deal with Yishmael. She had to deal with being taken captive, abducted by a Paro Avimelech. This is a life that's cool and Shavon L'Tova. Explains Moshe Feinstein in Drash Moshe. The godless was that in Sari Menu's worldview, all the years were just as equally good. They were all living with the Shekhinah, living with the Yad and Kosher Aloel, living with God's presence in her midst. In the end of the day, Sarah didn't complain. Sarah accepted it all in her mind view. From her mabat, her perspective, all her years were equally good. That's it. Torah, mitzvahs, masim tovim. Everything that she did, all of her godless, all of that unparalleled greatness. Sari Menu, yes, from her perspective, they were Kulon Shovin L'Tova. Heard a Vart years ago from Rabbi Kenny Hain, a Rav here in the neighborhood. He didn't recall from whom he heard it, but he said Gavaldik when how she cites the Medrash that Bas Kuf is Kabas Chof. What's Bas Kuf Kabas Chof? He says, let's take a look at Tehillim. What's Kapitel Chof in Tehillim? Lam Natzechem is Lo David Yan Chashem B'Yom Tzara Yisagem Chashem Lo Yaakov. And then you have Kuf. What's Kuf? Mizmor L'Soda, thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the godless of Sarah? That Bas Kuv Kebas Chof, in the end of the day, by Sarah, whether it was an opportunity to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, having a child, getting married to Avraham Avinu, whether it was the Mizmor L'Soda, or whether it was Takanei Sarah being abducted and taken captive by an Avimelech, by a Paro, having to deal with the Hagar, with the Yishmael, having to wait 90 years of barrenness, of infertility. It didn't make a difference. Her Yan Chashem B'Yom Tzara, the Bas Kuf, Tehillim Chav, and Tehillim Kuf, Mizmor L'Soda, Tzel Bazach, they're one and the same. Whether it's the Tzara, whether it's a cause for Toda, for giving thanks to Hashem above, to the Almighty in the end of the day, Acharei Kachlos HaKol, when all is said and done, they were one and the same. 120 Kapitel Kuf, Mizmor L'Soda, Kapitel Chav, Yan Chashem Yom Tzara, they were all, from her perspective, one and the same. That is the Kulon Shovin L'Tova. But again, we can't ignore the obvious interpretation, which is that all the years were great. Once we understand that that was really the hesped, the succinct eulogy delivered by an Avram Avinu, now we can answer another question. Beautiful Sefer Papule Charifta on Chumash, citing the Tzidkas Yosef. A gewaldige Pshat, writes the Papule Charifta, says we have to ask a question. Where was Yosef HaTzadik? Where was Yitzchak Avinu? I'm sorry, where was Yitzchak Avinu? In the end of the day, if Sari Menu dies, wouldn't it be a gewaldige hesped? Remember, outside of the Ibn Ezra's Pshat, he wasn't yet Bar Mitzvah, come out all the Rishonim, very, very clear. Yitzchak Avinu, you make the Chesh, was 37 years old, Mashas Takeda. So now what? She dies. This is 37 years. They had a journey 3 days back. This is already Erev Sukkot, so that's why the Pashtus, this whole incident took place in Erev Sukkot, when the Maisa Kivura, B'nei Ches v'Pulei. So can you imagine if not only Avram Avinu would stand up at the podium and deliver a magnificent eulogy, but what if you had a 37-year-old, remember, 37 years old, he was fully established, he was an Ola Tamima, he was a Karban, he was a Farut Tzaddik, he was a Gon Otzum. Can you imagine Yitzchak Avinu, 37 years old, stand up, he said, what a Gilei Milsa. Look how that reveals the godless, the greatness of Sari Menu. Let her husband Avram Avinu, the Golden Hador, the Tzaddik Hador, yes, let him get up and eulogize. And who should follow immediately in the heels of Avram Avinu? Her lone son, Yitzchak Avinu, the next Talmid Chacham, the successor in the patriarchal line, the Gadol, the Tzaddik, the pious, ever devout Yitzchak Avinu. Let him stand up and give a answer. Where was Yitzchak? No mention. He's not here at all. So granted, different shittas, various opinions bandied about Chazal. Where did he go between Kedis Yitzchak, and when he was ready to get married, Ben Arbam Shana, when he was 40 years of age? So the Medrash Gadol and others talk about he went up to Shamayim, to the heavens above, to be healed in Gan Eden Shamayla. Others say, some Zeal, the Medrash Gadol, the Medrash Abba, Yalko, to many different opinions cited throughout Chazal. Some say he was sent to the yeshiva Shem and Aver. Even if you're going to send him to the Shem and Aver, but okay, so if he went up to Gan Eden, he went up right away. If you're going to send him to the Shem, at least wait for his mother's hesped, wait for his mother's kavura, for the burial, and give it. Where's Yitzchak Avinu? All right, so Pulei Charifta Gevaldik. The Gemara says in Bava Basra that Amru Pnei is Amru Ziknei Hadar. Pnei Moshe, Kepnei Achama, Pnei Yeshua, Kepnei Levana. The face, the countenance of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ziknei Hadar declared, is like the face of the sun, and the face of Yeshua is like the face of the moon. So why Dafka? Why specifically the Ziknei Hador, the generation's elders? And why not everybody? And the answer, of course, is the elders, they could draw, and they alone could draw the stark contrast between the greatness of Moshe, the Umas, and contradistinction to the greatness of Yeshua. Moshe Rabbeinu writes the Gemara in Sota Yid Aleph, already when he was born, he's already Tuvya, he's already Tov, the whole bias is Mole Ora, is filled with metaphysical light. Moshe Rabbeinu was great start to finish, beginning to end. But Yoshua, in contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu, started out as regular little Yoshua. He was a regular person, but what? He was the Mishares, the one who was Mishamesh, the one who never left Moshe Rabbeinu's side. Lo Yomash Mitoch El, he never stayed out of the tent, and he worked and he built on himself, and he was steiging until he became the Mishares, and Moshe became the successor. And the next Manig Ador in the heels of his Rebbe Muvak Moshe Rabbeinu. Only the Ziknei Ador, who knew Yoshua when he was but a young child, they could draw the contrast. Everybody else, they only knew Yoshua as the great Yeshua that he was. Similarly, if the Iker Shvach, the primary praise, extolling the myriad multifarious virtues of Asara, came down to what Rashi shares, Apirach HaKadosh, Kulon, Shovan L'Teva. Who could testify to that? Only Avram Avinu, who grew up with Sarah. Remember, they were relatives. I in the end, see the end of Parshas Noach. And they came from the same family. Avram Avinu was what? Either at 3 years old, at 40, at 48, at 50, different opinions. At what age did he recognize? But Sarah already from the beginning was called Yiska. Her greatness was already from the beginning. She was called Yiska before she was called Sarah. Her godless was Sachs Baruch HaKadosh. And at the close of Noach, even before we got to know her by any other name, and that's a point made by the Maharami Prague in his Gur Aryeh, as well as in his brothers' Sefer, Igeras HaTiyul, and the Maharal talks about it as well as Chidusha Agodas and Sanhedrin Samachtes. Her godless was great before she ever met Avram Avinu. Mela Avram says, I can be the only one in the world who can testify, Kulan Shav and the Tova, that all these years were great. Mashek and Yitzchak, what would people say? A tzaddik, the next Goldador, the next tzaddik Ador. But I only see that in the last 37 years of her life. Sarah was great. But what about before? Maybe she was also Chalila Noved of Adazara. Who knows what she was like? why. Yitzchak would detract, his presence would only accentuate the final 37 years. Avram says he's going to be the only one to speak, so that the world knows I knew Sarah as a young little child, as the little girl Sarah Meno, and I alone can testify. Indeed, Kulon Shov and the Tova, they were all great. They were all Tov. She was a tzadekis from start to finish. Leida Malus Sarah Meno, that's the Galus, the Zohar Kodesh. There wasn't another woman like her Sarah Meno. Heads the list of the Zion Nevi'as, heads the list of Arbi Yafiyah Yosai B'Yolam. She was Sachsa Baruch HaKodesh. That's cool on Shalom L'Taiva, and only Avram Avinu can testify to that, and nobody else. As we fast forward about time, what happens? Vayavu Avram Lispol L'Sara V'Liv Kosa. Well, we know it's called Chai Yisara. The Torah began Vayu Chai Yisara, and then the next pasuk after Shnei Chai Yisara Vatama Sara. We already know it's called Parshas Chai Yisara. It begins Chai Yisara. It says again Chai Yisara Vatamas Sara, and then Vayavram Lispol L'Sara V'Liv Kosa. That for sure. Kuli Amamodi, everybody has to agree that indeed is superfluous. Asks the Noda Behuda or Yecheskel Lando in his Rosh Hashanah and Dur Zion. Vayav Avram Lissavda V'Livkosa. To eulogize her, the subject of our verses, clearly the one occupying center stage is Sari Menu. Lissavda V'Livkosa. Let's be a little more succinct. We don't waste words. Lispo Lissara. V'Livkosa writes the Noda Behuda. You might think, what was the hesped? The hesped was, well, Avram Avinu gets up. She was married to the Goda Hador. She was married, she wed the Tzaddik Hador. Mamela, she was great. Same reason the Torah says Avram Avinu is no longer called Avram. He's going to be called Avraham. He is henceforth going to be a father to a multitude of nations. And then a few verses later, Hashem tells Avram Avinu, and don't call your wife Sarai like he's Sarah Shema. Everybody asks the question, the Marami Prague, the brother of the Marami Prague. The Torah Tamima talks about in the Sefer Tosefes Bracha, Rameir Shapiro, and Rameir Das, of Salvation, reflection to the Rav. And why didn't the Torah tell me? Why is she called Sarah? The answer is you don't need to. Because anyone who marries the king is automatically the queen. If you marry the prince, you're automatically the princess. If you're married to Avraham, the Avram of Goyness, then by definition, Bar Kolchach, you necessarily are going to be transformed into the queen, the princess, the Tsar over all those same people as well. So people might err, and they might make the mistake that Gadlus, the greatness of Sarah, wasn't an inherent, intrinsic, tremendous Gadlus. It was rather the fact she was married to the Tzaddik Hador. So that's a Gilui Milsa, reveals to one and all that she was unique, she was special. After all, she had the schus, the merit of being the wife of the Tzaddik, the Goda Hador, the greatest in the generation. Writes the Noda Behuda Cheskel Landau Mi Prague in his Rosh Hashanah and Dur Zion. That's why the Torah went out of its way to spell it out. He didn't come Lissavda to give her a eulogy and say, hey, look at me, she was an Eishes Chaver, she was married to the king, married to the Tzaddik, the Gadol that he was. Lispo Lissora, I want the world to know her Gadolus, her independent Gadolus, mutually exclusive, of whom she married, of anything with whom anyone with whom she interacted, her inherent, intrinsic Gadolus. I'm coming Lispo Lissora, the Livkosa. Not Stama eulogy, but to tell you her Mailam, what was her uniqueness? Only about her can we say, Kul and Shov and Lataiva, they were all great. But yet what? We still have to understand. The very order of the pasuk seems not to make any sense. Vayavur Abraham, Lispo L'Sara V'Kosa. What happens to the Gemara in Elu Magach on the third Perkamoi Katan? The bottom of Daf Chazayin and base the Gemara shares with us that you have Shlosha Yom Lebechi. A person loses a deceased, a loved one. What do? The first 3 days are for tears. Then Zayin Lemisped, 7 days for Hesped, and then Lamed L'Tespirus. We have various dinim. But Chazal are telling us, and it's the Metzias. Puchazi Ma'amador. Go out to the world, and you see, what does the world do? You lose a loved one, Rachmana Litzlan, and God forbid, what do? You cry. First you cry, and then after you shed all the tears, then you prepare, you sit down, and now you prepare a eulogy, and you get up the next day, whatever it is, and you give a eulogy. First comes the Bechia, the Demos, and only then is it followed by the Hesped, by the words of eulogy. So many Mefarshim are troubled. What's Vayavra Abraham? Lispo L'Sara, Avil of Kosa. So let's start with Rav Yonasan Eifshitz. Listen to this gem. Rav Yonasan Eifshitz, the first Yonasan. He says, if you look at the Medrash, Rashi tells of Vayavur Avram mi Beersheva, and he came from Beersheva. But Rab Levi in the Medrash Rabbah says he came from Kivaroso shel Terach Aviv. He came from burying his father Terach. So Avram Avinu just buried his father Terach, according to an opinion in the Medrash. If he would come and he would cry right away and then he would give the hesped, people might say, why is Avram crying? He's not crying for sorrow. He's crying because he just buried his father. He's crying for Terach. So Avram Avinu held back the tears, so that first he says, Avram, let me stand up to the podium, lispel the sorrow, let me give a hesped for sorrow, and let me go on and elaborate and expound. Again, fleshing out Kula and Shovel the Taiva, and then when he cries, it'll be it'll be axiomatic, self-evident that he's crying for whom? Not for Terach, his father. He's crying solely and exclusively for Sarah. That's from Jonas and Aisha to Ferris Jonas. But let's head on Rav Shach. Listen to Rav Shach in the Sefer Al-Torah. Listen to this gem. Zokt of Shach. Avram Avinu, what? You lose your wife. Eishes Nurim. Lo Meisa Isha Ela Labaila Chazal relate. A woman dies. Yes, anyone who knew her and the family members, but no one feels the intensity and the enormity of the pain more than her husband, more than her spouse. Lo Meisa Isha Ela Labaila. Avram Avinu. Yes. Avadi cried in the Klayok, and Hirsch even says that the Livkosa, why is the Chav small? Does the Balaturim give to Perushim? In the Klayok, writes of Hirsch, he was a private, but he kept it locked in, he kept it private. But listen to this from Shach Gemaldik. Lispo L'Sarel of Kaisa. Avad the Avram Avinu might have had some crying, but it wasn't it was only a little bit of crying at the beginning. First, he came to be Masrid to say what? To let the world know it's not just my loss. The world is now devoid of Sarah Hatzadek. Sorry, Menu. What was going on in her tent? Sorry, Megayeres Asanoshim. He was more despondent over the void in Kvot Shamayim, in the Reboy Kvot Shamayim, who went all over. Aye, Sarah Shtechinim. Oh, she's being Malamik. She's transforming the woman. Ksav Sefer. Even says that Yitzchak Avinu felt as long as his mother's alive, she could transform anyone. That was her career. She was teaching Torah and disseminating Yiddishkeit and true Torah values to the world over, to all the women all over that would come into her tent. That's what Avram Avinu was crying for. Shach says, if it had said Levkosa, first Bechi, you would say, why is he crying? Because he lost his wife. And then he's giving her hesped. Only when Avram Avinu went on to share with the world. Lispo Sarah, let me tell you about the independent godless of Sarah. Like the note of Yehuda, let me tell you about her greatness. Let me tell you how she was Yiska, how she was Sasarach Goddess. Let me tell you how she changed the world. Let me tell you how she, let me tell you how she changed so many multitudes of people. She changed their lives. The world's not the same. She's the Tzadekes Hadar. And regardless of whom she would ever marry, she is the greatest. Shema B'Kaila. She's greater in Nevi'us, in prophecy, or than Netziv writes in the Magdala, greater in Ruach HaKodesh, and the divine spirit more than Avram. She's greater than Avram in certain areas. And what? Now Avram cries. Who's he crying for? Not his own personal loss. He's crying for the world. He's crying for the lack now of a Sorah HaTzadekes who was Marba Kvot Shamayim. He is crying for the diminishing of Kvot Shamayim now in the world. He's crying for the world now. He's not crying for himself. That's the Gol Hador. That's Zokton Shach. What mattered more to Avram Avinu? Not his own personal loss, that he lost his wife of all of these years. You know what he was crying for? The real Bechi. The tears were cascading down his face. Only after he gave a hesped, and he gave a hesped for Sarah, and he reminded himself that the world knew about her own independent, unique, choshev, godless, and parallel greatness. Now he was crying. If it had said crying, we would have said his own personal tears. And then the hesped, no, lispo Sarah. And that triggered, that engendered, that unstoppable but not for his own pain. It was for the pain of God's Klal Yisrael. Rabbi said the world just lost the Posek Hador in America. Rabbi Yoshev's grandson, Rabbi Yisraelson, has told me numerous times, his grandfather, the Gol Hador, the Posek Hador, Rabbi Yoshev Zechatzadik V'Kos Avrocha, was made several occasions. Rabbi David Feinstein Zatzal was the Posek Hador in America today. And now Rabbi said we've lost Gadol, we lost Tzadikim, and now Hashem Yerachem Aleinu. We just lost the Posek Hador of America, Mizvanenu. And what was the galus of David Feinstein? It was never about him. It was always about Yedim. It was always about somebody else. The honor of the pastors that he was, the godless, couched in such pastors that he would have breakfast, as we heard at the Lamaya, he would have breakfast at a local pizza shop with regular people. He would say, it's not befitting you. He says, what do you mean? I'm a passionate person. When they asked many people, if you could go back in history, you go back in time and you could have lunch, you could have dinner, you could spend quality any time on a park bench with any person in the history of the world. This one said, I'll sit with Rashi, I'll sit with the Rambam, I'll sit with the Gra, with the Chavetz Chaim, I'll sit with Moshe Rabbeinu, I'll sit with the others. I wonder if David Feinstein answer, I'll sit with 3 Aniyim. I'll sit and have lunch and sit on a park bench with an Ani, with a regular person. That's what he was. It was never about him. It was always about Yenim and every other Jew. What can I do for another person? What can I do for another Jew? And that was the Galus Avram Avinu. You know, with the sign of a Gadol Hador, it wasn't about him, it wasn't about his tears, it wasn't about his pain, it was about the lack of Kvod Shemayim. It's about the void now. Who is going to be Mara Kvod Shemayim like my wife? It's going to be the loss of a tzaddikus, not only to me, but to the world, to all of humanity. That's Lispo L'Sara Zoktav Shach. And only now did he start to really cry, after letting the world know the galus of Sarah. Now he starts to shed the tears. That's the mark of a Gadol. It was never about him. So let me just close with a little Chiddush. Rabbi side, it's a double Poshet. Chazal tell us, our sages reveal that what is Avram Avinu doing now? State in the Medrash relates that he's sitting al Pischo Shal Gehenna, by the entranceway to Gehenna. And what is he doing? Anyone who has a bris milah, he's pulling them out and sending them to Gan Eden. Hashem, no, they have a bris milah. That's it, bris milah. He introduced bris milah to the world, and he gets them all out of Gehenna and he throws them into Gan Eden. Let me ask you a whole chevra question. What about Avram Avinu after all the tzaddik, the Gadol that he was? This is the one who starts Yiddishkeit. What about his Gan Eden? He's sitting for all of history until Moshiach. He's sitting by the Pesach of Gehenna. Where's his Gan Eden? Where is his schar? Elawat near Lefinius Taitzi. It's a number Poshit. You know what Avram Avinu was? It's not about me. I don't care about my Olam Haba. I don't care about my Gan Eden Shamayla. My greatest Gan Eden is what? Is you, is Yedim, is caring about every Tom, Dick, and Harry, every Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. I'm willing to give up my schar sitting in Olam Haba in Gan Eden Shamayla by the Kisa Covenant. I'd rather spend my future. Avram Avinu tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to sit by the Pesach Shal Gehenna, because you know what my Gan Eden is? Not just giving up my Gan Eden. This is my Gan Eden. Avram Avinu's Gan Eden is the schus to spend all of, post his demise, to spend it taking Yidden, Heilige Yidden, throwing them out of Gehenna and sending them up to Gan Eden. Ein lecha Gan Eden gedola mizu. That's Avram Avinu's Gan Eden. He's not giving up Gan Eden. There's no greater Gan Eden for an Avram Avinu than to be able to give up his etzem Gan Eden to instead do what? Take another Yid, throw him out of Gehenna, saving Yidden from Gehenna. That's Avram Avinu. It's not about me and my tears. It's about Yidden. It's about the world. It's about who's going to take care of everybody else. That was Avram Avinu, and the main of that was Rav David Feinstein Tatzal. Rabbi say, let's go ahead and put Yenim first. Let's put everybody else before ourselves. That's the mark of a Gadol. Let's care and let's cry for the world, for the Rabbi Kvod Shamayim, and for the covenant of Kol Yochid v'Yochid, more than our own personal loss, our own personal tsar. Rabbi say, have a gavaldik geschmack the rest of the day and week.